The Wyoming wind cut through me like a rusty blade as I guided my horse through the deepening snow. February 1887 had been merciless, and this blizzard was shaping up to be the worst yet. My breath crystallized in the frigid air as I squinted through the white wall ahead, searching for any sign of the cattle that had scattered when the storm hit. Thunder Ridge Ranch was all I had left after losing my family to cholera 3 years back. The 40 head of cattle I was tracking represented my entire livelihood, and if I didn't find them before they froze or wandered into the treacherous ravines, I'd be finished. The banknote was due in 6 weeks, and old Morrison had made it clear there'd be no extensions. My horse, Dakota, suddenly stopped and whinnied nervously, his ears pricked forward, alert to something I couldn't yet perceive through the howling wind. I strained to listen, and there it was, a sound that didn't belong to the storm, a cry, human. "Easy, boy," I whispered, dismounting and leading Dakota toward the sound. The snow was knee-deep now, each step a struggle against nature's fury. The crying grew louder, more desperate, and my heart began to race. Out here, in the middle of nowhere, with a blizzard that could kill a man in minutes, someone was in trouble. Through the swirling snow, I saw her. A young woman, maybe 25, was hunched over something precious in her arms. Her dark hair was matted with ice, her lips blue with cold, and her thin coat was no match for this weather. She was rocking back and forth, trying to shield what I realized was a baby from the brutal wind. "Ma'am," I called out, fighting through the snow to reach her. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" She looked up with eyes wide with terror and exhaustion. Beautiful green eyes that held a story I couldn't yet read. The baby in her arms, couldn't be more than 6 months old, was wrapped in what looked like a wedding dress, torn and dirty. "Please," she gasped, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Please, help my baby. I can't feel my hands anymore." I didn't hesitate. Shrugging off my heavy coat, I wrapped it around both of them. "What's your name? How did you get out here?" "Sarah," she managed between chattering teeth. "Sarah Mitchell. Our wagon, it overturned in the storm." "My husband," her voice broke, and I saw the grief flash across her face. "Where's your wagon?" I asked, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew it didn't matter. In this storm, nothing mattered except getting them to shelter. "I don't know," she sobbed. "I've been walking for hours, maybe days. I lost track. The baby, Emily, she's so cold." The infant was frighteningly still, her tiny face pale. I pressed my ear close to her mouth and felt the faint whisper of breath. Alive, but barely. "Listen to me, Sarah," I said, gripping her shoulders gently, but firmly. "My cabin's about 2 miles from here. Can you ride?" She nodded weakly, and I helped them both onto Dakota's back before mounting behind them. The horse was strong, but carrying 3 people through deepening snow would test even his endurance as we rode. Sarah swayed dangerously, and I wrapped one arm around her waist to keep her from falling. She was burning with fever despite the cold, and I could feel her shivering uncontrollably against my chest. "Stay with me," I murmured close to her ear. "Tell me about Emily. How old is she?" 5 months, Sarah whispered. "Born in October. She's all I have left now." The pain in her voice cut deeper than the wind. "You're both going to make it," I promised, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. Hypothermia was setting in for both of them, and the baby hadn't made a sound since I'd found them. The familiar outline of my cabin, finally emerged through the snow like a beacon of hope. It wasn't much, just 2 rooms and a stone fireplace, but it was warm and dry. I'd never been so grateful to see those rough-hewn walls. I carried Sarah inside first, then gently took Emily from her arms. The baby was so still, so quiet. Sarah collapsed into the chair by the fireplace, which I quickly stoked to life. "We need to get you both warm," I said, wrapping Emily in every blanket I could find. "But we have to do it slowly, or the shock could be dangerous." Sarah tried to stand, reaching for her daughter. She's breathing," I assured her, though the baby's breath was shallow and her skin had a frightening blue tinge. "But we need to warm her up carefully." I heated water on the stove and soaked towels in the warm liquid, then wrapped them around Emily's tiny body. Sarah watched with desperate eyes as I worked, her own condition deteriorating by the minute. "Take off those wet clothes," I told her, turning away to give her privacy. "There's a dry shirt and some wool socks in the chest by the bed." When she was changed, I helped her sit close to the fire with Emily in her arms. The baby's color was slowly returning, and she let out a weak cry that was the most beautiful sound I'd heard all winter. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I thought we were going to die out there. I thought I was going to lose her, too. I asked gently. Sarah's face crumpled. "My husband, Thomas. He was thrown from the wagon when we hit the ice. I tried to help him, but the horses were spooked and the wagon started sliding toward the ravine. He told me to take Emily and run." She paused, struggling with the memory. I think he's gone." I knelt beside her chair, my hand resting gently on her shoulder. "I'm sorry. That must have been terrifying." "I should have stayed with him," she said, her voice thick with guilt. "I should have tried harder to save him." "You saved your daughter," I reminded her. "That's what he wanted. That's what any father would want." As the night wore on, I kept the fire burning bright and prepared warm broth for Sarah. Emily was responding well to the warmth, her crying becoming stronger and more regular. But Sarah's fever was getting worse, and she was becoming delirious. "The wagon," she mumbled, half asleep in the chair. "We have to find the wagon. Thomas is waiting." I didn't know if her husband was alive or dead, but I knew that come morning, if the storm cleared, I'd have to try to find him. The thought of leaving Sarah and Emily alone terrified me. But I couldn't live with myself if there was a chance the man was still alive and suffering in the cold. Outside, the wind continued to howl like a banshee, and the snow showed no signs of stopping. I settled into the chair across from Sarah, watching over them both as they slept fitfully by the fireplace. Emily's breathing was steady now, and some color had returned to her cheeks. Looking at them, this broken little family that had literally fallen into my life, felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 years. Purpose, since losing my wife, Margaret, and our unborn child to the cholera. I'd been merely existing, going through the motions of living without really caring about tomorrow. But tonight, I had a reason to care. 2 reasons, actually. And as I listened to the storm rage outside my cabin walls, I made a silent promise to the woman and child sleeping by my fire. Whatever it took, whatever the cost, I would keep them safe. I woke to the sound of Emily crying and Sarah's labored breathing. The fire had died down to embers, and the cabin was cold despite my efforts to keep it warm throughout the night. Sarah's fever had broken sometime before dawn, but she was still weak and disoriented. "How long was I asleep?" she asked, cradling Emily as the baby nursed. "Most of the night," I replied, stirring the coals back to life. The storm's letting up, but there's at least 3 feet of snow out there. Sarah's eyes filled with worry. Thomas, we have to look for Thomas. I'd been dreading this conversation, but there was no avoiding it. Sarah, I need to ask you some questions about what happened. Can you remember which direction you came from when I found you? She closed her eyes, trying to recall. We were traveling west on the Territorial Road, heading for the Johnson settlement. Thomas had heard there was work there, building a new church. The storm hit so suddenly, and the horses couldn't see the road anymore. When we went over the embankment, everything happened so fast. How far had you walked before I found you? I don't know, hours. I kept falling in the snow, and Emily was crying so much. I was so scared she would freeze. Sarah's voice trembled. With the memory, I pulled on my heavy coat and boots. I'm going to look for your wagon. The road's about 5 miles from here, and if you walked for hours in that storm, you couldn't have made it too far from where you started. No, Sarah struggled to stand, Emily still in her arms. Don't leave us. What if something happens to you? What if you don't come back? The terror in her voice was raw and real. She'd already lost everything once. The thought of being abandoned again was unbearable. Sarah, listen to me. I took her hands in mine, surprised by how natural the gesture felt. Your husband might still be alive. If there's even a chance, I have to try. And I will come back. I give you my word. She searched my eyes for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. Take Dakota. He's strong, and he knows this country. I'll be back before dark, I promised. Keep the fire going, and there's food in the pantry. If anything happens, anything at all, fire, 3 shots from the rifle above the mantel. I'll hear it and come running. The snow outside was deeper than I'd expected, and Dakota struggled to make progress through the drifts. The storm had erased all landmarks, transforming the familiar landscape into an alien white wilderness. I followed what I thought was the direction Sarah had come from, searching for any sign of the overturned wagon. After 2 hours of riding, I found it. The wagon lay on its side, at the bottom of a steep embankment, partially buried in snow. The horses were gone, either dead or scattered by the storm. I approached carefully, my heart pounding as I looked for any sign of Thomas Mitchell. I found him 20 yards from the wagon, face down in the snow. He was alive, but barely. His left leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, clearly broken, and his skin was grey with cold. He'd managed to crawl away from the wagon before collapsing, probably trying to follow his wife and child. Thomas, I called, kneeling beside him. Thomas, can you hear me? His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. Sarah, he whispered. Where's Sarah? Where's my baby? They're safe, I told him quickly. They're at my cabin. We need to get you out of here. Getting Thomas onto Dakota was a nightmare. The man was delirious with cold and pain, and his broken leg made every movement agony. But somehow we managed it, and I began the slow journey back to the cabin. Thomas drifted in and out of consciousness. During the ride, mumbling about Sarah and Emily, about the job in Johnson settlement, about dreams he'd had for his family. The more he talked, the more my heart sank. This was a good man, a loving husband and father who'd risked everything to give his family a better life. When we finally reached the cabin, Sarah was waiting by the window. She saw us coming and burst through the door, Emily bundled in her arms. Thomas, she cried, tears streaming down her face. Oh God, Thomas, I thought you were dead. But as I helped him down from the horse, I could see the shock in Sarah's eyes. Thomas was in bad shape, worse than I'd let myself admit during the ride. His breathing was shallow, his skin had a waxy pallor, and his broken leg was swollen and discolored. We got him inside and laid him on the bed. Sarah hovered anxiously as I examined his injuries. The leg was definitely broken, but that wasn't what worried me most. His fingers and toes showed signs of severe frostbite, and he was running a high fever. "Is he going to be all right?" Sarah asked, her voice small and frightened. I wanted to lie, to give her hope, but the truth was written all over Thomas's condition. "I don't know," I admitted. "He's been out there all night in sub-zero temperatures. His body's been through a trauma that would kill most men." Thomas's eyes opened, and he reached weakly for Sarah's hand. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you." "Don't talk like that," Sarah said fiercely, gripping his hand. "You're going to be fine. We're all going to be fine." But even as she spoke the words, I could see the doubt in her eyes. Thomas was dying, and we all knew it. Over the next 3 days, I did everything I could to save him. I set his leg as best I could with the limited supplies I had, treated his frostbite, and forced warm broth down his throat. Sarah never left his side, caring for Emily with one hand while holding Thomas with the other. On the 3rd night, Thomas took a turn for the worse. His fever spiked, and he began talking to people who weren't there: his father, his brother who'd died in the war, his mother who'd passed when he was young. "Sarah," he called out during one of his lucid moments. "Come here." She leaned close, Emily sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Promise me something," Thomas whispered, his voice barely audible. "Promise me you'll be happy. Don't spend your life mourning me. Find someone good, someone who will love you and Emily the way you deserve." "Thomas, don't promise me," he insisted, his grip on her hand surprisingly strong. "I can't go in peace unless I know you'll be okay." Through her tears, Sarah nodded. "I promise." Thomas looked at me then, his eyes clearer than they'd been in days. "Take care of them," he said simply. "Please," I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. Thomas Mitchell died just before dawn on the 4th day, with Sarah holding his hand and Emily sleeping peacefully nearby. He went quietly, without pain, like a man finally able to rest after a long, hard journey. Sarah didn't cry at first. She just sat there, holding his still hand, staring at his peaceful face, as if she could will him back to life through sheer force of love. When the tears finally came, they were silent and heartbreaking. The grief of a woman who'd lost everything that mattered to her in the space of a week. I wanted to comfort her, to take away her pain, but I knew from experience that some sorrows have to be carried alone. Instead, I quietly made arrangements for Thomas's burial, digging a grave in the small plot behind the cabin where I'd laid my own family to rest. As I worked in the cold morning air, I thought about the promises we'd both made, his to his wife, mine to him. I'd given my word to protect Sarah and Emily, but I was beginning to realize that my feelings for them went deeper than mere obligation. Somewhere in those 4 desperate days, watching Sarah care for her dying husband with such devotion, seeing her strength in the face of unimaginable loss, I'd fallen in love with her. And that terrified me more than any blizzard ever could. The days following Thomas's funeral passed in a strange, quiet rhythm. Sarah moved through the cabin like a ghost, performing the necessary tasks of caring for Emily but speaking little. I gave her space to grieve while struggling with my own growing feelings and the promise I'd made to her dying husband. 2 weeks after we buried Thomas, Sarah finally spoke more than a few words to me. "I need to leave," she said one evening as we sat by the fire. Emily was sleeping in her arms, and the baby's peaceful breathing was the only sound besides the crackling logs. Leave. The word hit me like a physical blow. Where would you go, Johnson? Settlement, maybe. Thomas said there was work there. Or back east, to my sister in Ohio. She stared into the flames, her voice flat and emotionless. "I can't stay here forever, imposing on your kindness." "You're not imposing," I said quickly. "This is your home for as long as you need it to be." Sarah looked at me then, really looked at me, for the first time since Thomas died. "Why are you doing this, Jack? Why are you being so good to us?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications I wasn't ready to face. "Because it's the right thing to do," I said finally, which was true, if not the whole truth. "Is it?" she asked quietly. "Or is there something else?" I felt heat rise in my cheeks and was grateful for the dim firelight. "I don't know what you mean. I see how you look at me sometimes," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper, "like you're trying not to feel something you shouldn't feel." My heart pounded in my chest. Was I that transparent? "Sarah, I feel it too," she interrupted, her admission hanging between us like a loaded gun. "And it makes me feel like the worst person in the world. My husband's been dead for 2 weeks, and I'm already thinking about another man. What kind of woman does that make me?" I moved to kneel beside her chair, careful not to disturb Emily. "It makes you human," I said gently. "You've been through something traumatic. You're confused and scared and looking for something solid to hold on to. That's not wrong, Sarah. That's survival." She looked down at Emily, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. "Thomas made me promise to be happy. He made me promise to find someone good. But how can I even think about that when his grave is still fresh in the ground?" "Because he loved you," I said simply, "and because Emily needs stability and security more than she needs you to mourn forever." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she surprised me by reaching out and taking my hand. "Tell me about your wife," she said. "Tell me about Margaret." The request caught me off guard. I'd barely spoken Margaret's name aloud since she died. But something in Sarah's voice made me want to share the burden I'd been carrying alone for 3 years. "She was beautiful," I began slowly. "Not just on the outside, though she was that too. She was beautiful in her soul. She saw good in everyone, even people who didn't deserve it. She made this cabin feel like a palace just by being in it." "How did she die?" "Cholera epidemic in the summer of '84. She was pregnant with our first child when she got sick. I lost them both within a week. The old pain was still there, but duller now, like a scar that ached in bad weather. I blamed myself for a long time, thought maybe if I'd been a better husband, if I'd taken better care of her, ... But you know that's not true," Sarah said softly. "My head knows it. My heart took longer to accept it." I looked at her, this broken, beautiful woman who'd stumbled into my life during a blizzard. "Margaret would have liked you. She would have said you were brave and strong, and she would have told me I was an idiot if I let you walk away." Sarah's eyes widened. "Jack, ... I'm not asking you to feel anything you're not ready to feel," I said quickly. "I'm just saying that when you are ready, if you're ever ready, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Before Sarah could respond, we heard the sound of horses approaching through the snow. I grabbed the rifle from above the mantel and moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. 3 men on horseback were approaching the cabin, and even In the dim moonlight, I could see they were armed. My blood ran cold as I recognized the lead rider, Frank Morrison, the banker's son, and two of his friends from town. "Sarah, take Emily and get behind the bed," I whispered urgently. "Don't make a sound no matter what happens." "What's wrong?" she asked, but she was already moving, clutching Emily protectively. "Trouble," I said grimly, checking to make sure the rifle was loaded. Frank Morrison's voice carried through the thin cabin walls. "Jack Thornton, we know you're in there. Come out and let's talk like civilized men." I opened the door a crack, the rifle ready in my hands. "It's late, Frank. What do you want?" "Heard you got yourself some company," Frank called back, his voice slurred with whiskey. "Heard there's a pretty little widow woman holed up in there with you." My blood boiled. "You heard wrong. Now get off my land before I put holes in all three of you." Frank laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. "Now, Jack, that's not very neighborly. See, my daddy's been wondering how you're planning to pay that note that's coming due. And when I heard about your ... house guest ... well, I got to thinking. Maybe we could work out a different kind of arrangement." I stepped outside, closing the door firmly behind me. "Say what you came to say, and then get out." "Simple proposition," Frank said, dismounting and walking closer. His two companions followed suit, spreading out to flank me. "You let us have a little time with the widow woman, and maybe Daddy forgets about that banknote for a while." I raised the rifle, pointing it directly at Frank's chest. "You've got 3 seconds to get back on your horse and ride away. After that, I start shooting." "You don't understand the position you're in, Jack," Frank said, but his voice had lost some of its cocky confidence. "You can't pay that note. You're going to lose this place anyway. At least this way, you buy yourself some time." "One," I said calmly. "Don't be stupid, Thornton. There's 3 of us, and 1 of you, 2. Frank's hand moved toward his gun, and I pulled the trigger. The shot echoed across the snowy landscape, and Frank's hat flew off his head. He stumbled backward, his face pale with shock. 3, I said, working the bolt action to chamber another round. "Next one goes through your heart. This isn't over." Frank snarled as he scrambled back onto his horse. "You can't hide behind that rifle forever." They rode away into the darkness, but I knew they'd be back. Frank Morrison was the kind of man who couldn't let a slight go unanswered, especially not in front of his friends. I went back inside to find Sarah standing by the bed, Emily clutched tightly in her arms. Her face was white with fear. "What did they want?" she asked, though I suspected she already knew. "They wanted to hurt you," I said honestly, "and they'll be back with more men next time." Sarah sank down onto the bed, looking suddenly very small and vulnerable. "This is my fault. I've brought trouble to your door." "No," I said firmly, sitting beside her on the bed. "This is Frank Morrison being a coward and a bully. It has nothing to do with you. What are we going to do?" I looked at her, at this woman I'd grown to love, holding the child I'd already begun to think of as my own, and I knew there was only one answer. "We're going to fight," I said simply, "and we're going to win." But even as I spoke the words, I wondered if I was making a promise I couldn't keep. Frank Morrison had money, influence, and men willing to do his dirty work. All I had was a lever-action rifle, a determination to protect what mattered to me, and the desperate hope that sometimes that was enough. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. I was splitting wood behind the cabin when I heard a single Horse approaching. My hand moved instinctively to the rifle leaning against the woodpile, but I relaxed when I recognized the rider. Sheriff Tom Bradley had been a friend of my father's and one of the few honest lawmen left in this part of Wyoming. He was pushing 60, with gray hair and a weathered face that had seen too much trouble over the years. "Morning, Jack," he called out as he dismounted. "Mind if we have a talk?" "Course, Tom. Come on inside. Sarah's got coffee on." Inside the cabin, Sarah looked up nervously as we entered. She was feeding Emily, and the domestic scene struck me with its simple beauty, something worth protecting at any cost. "Ma'am," Sheriff Bradley nodded politely, removing his hat. "Sorry to intrude. I'm Tom Bradley, Sheriff of Carbon County." "Sarah Mitchell," she replied quietly. "Thank you for coming, Sheriff." Bradley's eyes were kind but sharp as he took in the scene: the makeshift cradle by the fire, Sarah's morning dress, the tension in the air. "I heard about your husband, Mrs. Mitchell. I'm real sorry for your loss. Thank you." The sheriff turned to me, his expression growing serious. "Jack, I got a visit from Frank Morrison this morning. He claims you threatened him and his friends with a rifle last night." "That's right," I said without hesitation. After he suggested I hand over Mrs. Mitchell in exchange for extending my banknote, Bradley's jaw tightened. He said, "What now?" "You heard me right. Frank Morrison rode out here, drunk with two of his friends, and made it clear what kind of arrangement he had in mind." The sheriff was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. "Frank's telling a different story. Says he came out here to check on you neighborly like, and you went crazy, started waving a gun around." "Which story do you believe?" I asked. Bradley looked at Sarah, then back at me. "I've known you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper, Jack. You're not a violent man. But Frank Morrison, ... double quotes, he shook his head. That boy's been troubled since the day he was born. So what happens now?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now I do my job," Bradley said firmly. "Mrs. Mitchell, would you be willing to swear out a complaint against Frank Morrison for threatening you?" Sarah's eyes widened. I didn't actually hear what he said. I was inside. "But you saw 3 armed men ride up to this cabin in the middle of the night with hostile intent." "Yes, sir, that's enough." Bradley stood up, settling his hat back on his head. "Jack, I want you to come into town with me tomorrow morning. Bring Mrs. Mitchell and the baby. We're going to file an official complaint and get this on record." "Tom, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but no buts," the sheriff interrupted. "Old man Morrison might own half this county, but he doesn't own me. And if his son thinks he can terrorize decent folks, he's got another think coming." After Bradley left, Sarah was quiet for a long time. She sat by the fire, holding Emily and staring into the flames with an expression I couldn't read. "What are you thinking about?" I asked finally. "About running away," she admitted. "About taking Emily and disappearing before this gets any worse." Words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Sarah, I'm serious, Jack. Look what's happened since I came here. Your peaceful life has been turned upside down. You're facing threats from dangerous men. All because of me." I knelt beside her chair, taking her free hand in both of mine. "Listen to me. My life wasn't peaceful before you came. It was empty. I was just going through the motions, waiting to die. You and Emily didn't disrupt my life. Few gave me one." Tears started sliding down her cheeks. "But what if something happens to you? What if Frank Morrison comes back with more men? What if..." I silenced her with a gentle finger against her lips. What if we stop running from what might happen and start fighting for what we want to happen? And what do we want to happen? She whispered. We want to be a family, I said simply. We want to raise Emily together in this cabin. We want to build something good and decent and worth defending. Sarah looked down at Emily, then back at me. Is that what you really want? To be Emily's father? To be my husband? I finished for her. Yes, Sarah, that's exactly what I want. If you'll have me. She was quiet for so long, I thought she was going to say no. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. Thomas has been dead for 3 weeks. I know, people will talk. They'll say I'm shameless, moving from one man to another so quickly. Let them talk. They'll say you're taking advantage of a grieving widow. Are you grieving? I asked gently. Sarah considered the question seriously. Yes, she said finally. I'm grieving the life Thomas and I planned together. The future will never have. But I'm not grieving the idea of love, Jack. I'm not grieving the possibility of happiness. She shifted Emily to one arm and reached up to touch my face with her free hand. I love you, she said simply. I don't know when it happened or how, but I do. Is that terrible? No, I whispered, covering her hand with mine. It's a miracle. We were married 3 days later in Sheriff Bradley's office with his wife Martha, serving as witness and Emily sleeping peacefully in Sarah's arms. It wasn't the wedding either of us had imagined, but it was real and legal and binding. The celebration was short-lived. That evening, as we sat by the fire in our cabin, now we saw the orange glow on the horizon that every rancher dreaded. Fire. That's coming from the direction of town, I said, grabbing my coat and rifle. Jack, don't go, Sarah pleaded. What if it's a trap? If it's a trap, they won't expect me to ride toward it instead of away from it, I reasoned. Stay here with Emily, bar the door, and don't open it for anyone but me. The ride to town revealed the truth of the situation. The general store was ablaze, and half the main street was threatened. But this wasn't just any fire, which was deliberately set, and Frank Morrison was standing across the street, watching it burn with a satisfied smile on his face. I dismounted and walked straight up to him. Enjoying the show, Frank? He turned, his smile widening when he saw me. Well, if it isn't the newlywed. Heard you got yourself married today. Mighty quick work, even for a desperate man. Did you set this fire? Me? Frank laughed. Why would I burn down buildings I'm going to own when Daddy forecloses on half the businesses in town? Because you're a coward who can't face a man straight on. Frank's smile faded. You think you're smart, getting Sheriff Bradley on your side. But Bradley's an old man, and old men don't live forever. When he's gone, things are going to change around here. Is that a threat? It's a promise. The confrontation was interrupted by Sheriff Bradley himself, who appeared at my shoulder with his gun drawn. Frank Morrison, he said loudly, you're under arrest for arson. You can't prove I set that fire, Frank snarled. Maybe not, Bradley admitted. But I can prove you threatened a federal witness. Mrs. Mitchell filed a complaint with the territorial marshal this afternoon. You're wanted for questioning in connection with attempted assault and conspiracy. Frank's face went pale. My father will, your father will what? Break federal law to protect you. Bradley smiled grimly. I don't think so, son. Even he's not that stupid. As they led Frank away in shackles, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not just for myself, but for the future Sarah, Emily, and I could build together. The fire was contained before it could spread to the residential. section of town, and Frank Morrison was eventually convicted and sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. His father, faced with the scandal, quietly settled my banknote and several others to avoid further legal trouble. Spring came early that year, and with it, a sense of new beginnings. Sarah and I worked together to expand the cabin, adding a proper bedroom for Emily and a larger kitchen. We planted a garden and talked about the cattle we'd buy when the bank settlement money came through. On Emily's first birthday, we stood together by Thomas Mitchell's grave, Sarah holding our daughter while I held our new son Thomas, Jack Thornton, named for the man who'd made our happiness possible through his final act of love. "Do you think he'd approve?" Sarah asked, quietly, looking down at the simple wooden cross we'd carved with Thomas's name. "I think he'd be happy knowing you kept your promise," I replied. "You found happiness. You found love. You found someone to take care of you and Emily." Sarah leaned against my shoulder, and I marveled at how perfectly she fit there, how right it felt to have this family, this life, this chance at forever. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For finding us in the snow that night, for bringing us home." I kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair and the promise of all our tomorrows. "Thank you for letting me." The Wyoming wind still blew cold sometimes, and the winters were still harsh, but our cabin was always warm now, filled with laughter and love, and the sound of children playing by the fire. We'd all been lost in our own storms before that blizzard brought us together. Sarah had lost her husband and her future. Emily had nearly lost her life, and I had lost my will to truly live. But sometimes, the worst storms bring the greatest gifts. Sometimes, when you think you're at the end of everything, you're actually at the beginning of something beautiful. As I watched my wife and children sleep peacefully by the fireplace that had once warmed only my lonely existence, I understood something profound about second chances. They don't come to those who wait for them, they come to those who are brave enough to reach out and grab them when they appear. Even in the middle of a blizzard, even when it seems impossible. The snow outside continued to fall, as it had that night I found them, but now it fell on a home filled with love, on a family bound not just by circumstance but by choice, on a future bright with possibility. And in the morning, when the storm passed and the sun came out, we would face whatever came next together, the way families do, the way love demands, the way second chances are meant to be lived. The blizzard had tried to take everything from us. Instead, it had given us each other. And that, I knew as I drifted off to sleep with my family safe around me, was the greatest miracle of all.